Okay, so now we're going to cover continuity and innovations in state forms and their interactions from 600 to about 1450 CE. So state formation in this time period demonstrated a lot of continuities, innovations, and diversity within various regions. In Afro-Eurasia, you've got some states attempting with differing degrees of success to preserve or revive imperial structures, while smaller, less centralized states continue to develop. You have the expansion of Islam, introducing a new concept, the caliphate, to Afro-Eurasian states. Pastoral peoples in Eurasia built powerful and distinctive empires that integrated people and institutions from both the pastoral and agrarian worlds. And then in the Americas, you've got powerful states developed in both Mesoamerica and the Andean region. So empires collapsed and were reconstituted in this period, and in some regions, new state forms emerged. So we'll talk about all the different types that you see here. And this is something that comes up quite a bit in the AP exam. You'll have, like we have, just for example, the 2011 compare contrast essay, which is now the modern LEQ or long essay question. Also, the 2014 compare contrast or LEQ. And often on practice exams, that is also a choice. So be prepared to understand the ways that some empires collapsed and some that were new and that arose. So reconstituted governments. Following the collapses of empires, most reconstituted governments, including the Byzantine Empire and the Chinese dynasties like Sui, Tang, Song, they combined traditional sources of power and legitimacy with innovations better suited to their specific local context. So traditional sources of power and legitimacy like the patriarchy, so men ruled, religion, depending on your location. So for China, you would have Confucianism and Buddhism being highly influential. Within the Byzantine Empire, you have Catholicism being highly influential, and then eventually splitting into the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church. Landowning elites still were traditional in their status. Even though some empires would try to rid them of that status, you still have your elite class. New innovations would be new methods of taxation, like income tax and such. Tributary systems, so places that would be like on the nomadic groups that would be on the fringe of an empire, they would be forced into paying tribute to the leaders of that area for protection. You also have the adaptation of religious institutions in order to fit your region. So think about Ethiopia and Coptic Christianity. They created synthetic religion based on Christianity coming in, but also including their traditional beliefs. You have new forms of governments coming up. So in some places, you've got these new types of governments. You've got the Abbasid Caliphate, which was the third Islamic caliphate to succeed Muhammad, and it was started by Abbas ibn Abd al-Muttalib in 750, and it lasted from 750 to 1517. And they ruled as caliphs for most of their period from their capital in Baghdad, which was taken over from the Umayyads. They had a lot of cultural and scientific prosperity in this caliphate. Muslim Iberia, also known as Al-Andalus in basically Muslim Spain, and it was medieval Muslim territory and cultural domain in the Iberian Peninsula, and the Muslims there were known as Moors. This area pretty much lasted from 711 to 1492, when you've got the Spanish Inquisition and everything kind of forcing the Muslims out. You got major advances in trigonometry, astronomy, surgery, pharmacology, and other fields coming from this group. It became a major educational center for Europe and the lands around the Mediterranean, but it was often in conflict with Christian kingdoms from the north. Mongol Khanates, you see, or wait, no, sorry, Delhi Sultanates, the Muslim kingdom in Delhi and the Indian subcontinent, lasted from about 1206 to about 1526. There were 5 dynasties, including the Mamluks. and they repelled attacks from the Mongol Empire. They were one of the few empires to be able to do that. And they also had one of the few female rulers in Islamic history, Razia Sultana, who ruled from 1236 to 1240. Um, Unfortunately, the Delhi Sultanates caused a lot of destruction and desecration of politically important temples of South Asia, but they also built a lot of their own too. They were succeeded by the Mughal Empire after 1526. Now moving into the Mongol Khanates. They existed during the 13th and 14th centuries, and they were the largest contiguous, so stuck together, land empire in history. They originated in the steppes of Central Asia, and then they were unified under Genghis Khan and ruled by his successors. Not lasting very long, only about 100 years, but it was impressive while it did last, and it was actually a very tolerant rule. So you've got city-states in the Italian peninsula and East Africa and Southeast Asia and the Americas. And basically, city-states are cities that have independent governments. I mean, really pretty simple. So if you look at the Italian peninsula, we're talking like Venice and places like that, Genoa. East Africa, you have your East African cities, Southeast Asia, and the Americas. So local forms of governance as opposed to overall centralized government. And you see that throughout Europe and Japan too, decentralized government. You've got forms of feudalism in both Europe and Japan. So in Europe, you've got your king, your lord getting the land from the king in exchange for service. The lord had knights for protection, and the lord also had serfs as vassals or workers. And in Japan, you had an emperor instead of a king. You had a shogun or a military ruler. Your daimyos were your lords. Your samurai were basically your knights, and your peasants were your workers. So Persian traditions influenced Islamic states. So if you look at the Islamization of Iran, it was the result of the Muslim conquest of Persia, and Islam was gradually accepted by the majority of the population. And they've also maintained certain pre-Islamic traditions, including their language and their culture, and adapted them with Islamic codes. And the customs and traditions merged as the Iranian Islamic identity. And you also have a blossoming of Persian literature, philosophy, medicine, and art. Those became major elements of the newly formed Muslim civilization in that location. And it's kind of known as an Islamic golden age. Now, Chinese traditions also influenced Japan. You have written language being influenced by the Chinese. You have religion fused Buddhism and Confucianism with Shinto beliefs. The government was influenced by Chinese bureaucracy. They had elaborate temples and curved roofs. They had very organized city roadways. They had paintings and sculpture influenced by Buddhism. So highly, highly influenced by the Chinese traditions, but then creating their own traditions out of that. In the Americas, as in Afro-Eurasia, you have state systems expanding in scope and reach, and the networks of the city-states flourished in the Maya region, and at the end of the period, imperial systems were created by the Mexica or the Aztecs and the Inca. The Incas had very large road and bridge systems, as well as sophisticated irrigation systems, which helped to connect them through the mountainous area that you see in South America. Maya, again, was city-states, but then you've got your empires for the Aztecs, which, again, you see on the map in, like, the purplish. You also have interregional contacts and conflicts between states and empires, encouraging significant technological and cultural transfers. So not only are you having war, but things get shared in war too. So between the Tang, China, and the Abbasids, you've got paper-making techniques. So prisoners of war were captured by the Abbasids after the Battle of Talas River in July of 751. And a lot of those prisoners of war were skilled Chinese artisans who knew how to make paper. So they taught the Arab world and then Europe how to make paper, which was really important. Gunpowder spread across the Mongol Empire, which was traded on the Silk Roads from China all the way over to Europe. Neo-Confucianism spread from China to Korea and Japan along trade routes. And then during the Crusades, art and literature went both ways. Spices and luxury goods went from the Middle East to Europe. Muslims gave Europeans classical Greek and Roman texts because remember, the Arab Muslims had saved all of those. And the Muslims didn't take a whole lot culturally, but they did take military tactics from the European crusaders. So you do see cross cultural interactions.